I'm Jeffrey Snover. I'm the architect for Monad.
Yeah, and you've been on Channel 9 before, right?
I have, talking about Monad.
Excellent.
But
well,
today,
it's been a while since we've seen you, right?
Yeah.
You're looking good.
Thanks. Lost a little bit of weight.
Yeah.
Exercising, doing all the gym stuff.
All the stuff I should be doing. I should do it someday. Anyway, so what's up with that? What were you thinking about?
Yeah, so I went to the PDC and I just walked away just totally psyched. So I thought it was a great PDC. And as I sat back and said, boy, why am I so excited? I kind of digested it and came to the conclusion that this kind of core idea of the CLR, to have a virtual machine and a set of frameworks, which is independent of the language, is just first produced a great wave of innovation in round one. We're now on the second wave of innovation that core decision is made, right? Yeah. The first wave of innovation was, geez, now languages is kind of a, it used to be that C++ was a very different beast than VB, okay? Yep. And it had its own ecosystem of technology. Geez, this technology works here, but it doesn't work there. Why doesn't it work there? Well, it just doesn't. Yeah. And they were their own ecosystems, and they were really radically different languages. Yep. But as C#...
And even IDEs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Exactly.
Particularly in the early days. Right?
Yeah. But then C# and VB.NET, these things became very, very similar, right? And by and large, a ton of the things that you had to learn were the object models, etc., which were the same across those. So just as C++ and VB went and became very similar with C# and VB.NET, so too you used to have systems programming languages and shell and scripting languages, and they were even farther apart than those two things. And you see with this PDC, those things are becoming very similar. Yep. So if you sit back and you look at the link technology that was described at the PDC,
Anders
wonderful stuff. Yeah. Wonderful stuff. It is essentially taking shell concepts and applying them to systems programming. Yep. I mean, think about the sequence operators, right? What those are pipelines. Yep. That's a pipeline in a shell, okay? But applied to objects. Basically, what Monad did to pipeline to the shell, which is say, oh, shells are great, pipelines, blah blah blah, but they ought to be pipelines of objects. And now that concept is finding its way into systems programming languages. Okay. So it starts off in shells, and now it's found in systems programming languages. So too, Monad is a shell, but you can do systems programming type operations with it, right? Because not only can you invoke any command, you can also access any .NET object. Yeah. So whereas these two worlds used to be radically different, now they're overlapping. And so it's wildly exciting. And so too, it's this new wave of innovation where a bunch of our traditional concepts, systems programming, scripting, business applications, shells, all those things are getting jumbled, and it's truly exciting. Yep. Yeah. And so so then you say, well, what are the distinctions, right? These traditional distinctions go away. Interpreted. Well, shells and scripts are interpreted. But then you think about ASP. I can write ASP applications in C# that don't get compiled until I invoke it. Right. So is that interpreted? Right? I mean, it doesn't get there's no compilation step.
Does it matter anymore?
Exactly. Does it matter anymore?
The abstraction level has gone up, Yeah. I mean, this whole industry used to be written in assembler, right?
Absolutely.
We don't do that anymore. And then, for the most part, there's still things here that are done in assembler. But
yeah. And then think about like IronPython, right? Yeah. IronPython, a scripting language, interpreted. And yet Jim Huguenin, right, you know the story about Jim, right? Jim started off saying, oh, I'm going to prove that .NET's a lousy environment for dynamic languages, just stinks. And he went and said, oh my God, it's wonderful, it's fantastic, and then decided to join the company. Right?
Oh yeah,
to make it even better, right? And so what he does with IronPython.
Watch what you say about Microsoft. I told Bill to split up the company. He hired me. It's like if you mouth off, you might get sucked into this beast, and you have to prove what you're doing.
Well, actually, it goes to the point that says, our best ally is knowledge. Right? When you actually, it's easy to step back and throw rocks, and if you're ignorant, that's an easy thing to do. But if you're not, if you say, no, I'm going to investigate it, I'm going to prove my point, all of a sudden a bunch of those things begin to go away, and you start to say, hey, you know, there's some real value here. These guys are onto something.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, Jim took a traditional scripting language, and he has it, you know, generating IL, right? So it's effectively compilation on the fly with dynamic emit. So really exciting stuff. And then you say, so it's not, you know, so you got a scripting language which is compiled, you got a compiled language which is interpreted. You know, what's going on with that? And so too, well, types. Oh, okay, types. Strong types versus loose types, right? Those are your two camps. But even those camps are getting fuzzy, right?
Wow.
So take Monad.
Should you use that option explicit or not?
Yeah, exactly. Monad, a shell language, right? Shells. What are their data types? Strings, right? But in Monad, no, you have strings. You have any .NET type can be a type within the Monad language. So you can deal with rich types and extensible types where you have type extension. But now if you take a look at what's going on in the type system with with Link, essentially Anders has gone and said, oh, you can party on the types too. I mean, types are a really interesting thing, right? This is a great story. Well, it's this whole strong typing versus loose typing, right? And our concepts of what those mean and what's appropriate, right? There's a great story about, you know, the guy who turned me on to monads was a guy named Val Dusek, philosophy professor at the University of New Hampshire, and he also introduced me to this philosopher of science, Bas van Fraassen. And so Bas tells a story about how, well, you know, when we think about science and physicists, there are really kind of three camps of interpretation of them. The realists, the instrumentalists, and the fictionalists. I said, well, that's interesting. What's that mean? He says, well, the realists, they say that when a physicist talks about protons, neutrons, and electrons, he means there's a proton, a neutron, and electron, that those are real things. I said, okay, yeah, what about the instrumentalists? So, well, instrumentalists, they say when a physicist talks about protons, neutrons, and electrons, that's an instrument for him to describe a phenomenon. He doesn't really mean that they exist. I said, okay, but what's a fictionalist? He said, well, a fictionalist says that when a physicist talks about protons, neutrons, and electrons, he means that those are really things. But we don't have to believe them. So an analogy exists with the type system, right? A type system, well, what is a type? Well, a type is, you know, the traditionalists, the realists, if you will, say a type is my implementation of this piece of code. It's a fixed contract that you get, okay? Now, in terms of instrumentalists, in the management world, we've always been kind of loosey-goosey about types, right? A type is, you know, it's like a contract, you know? But sometimes you're going to get more properties and sometimes less, you know? But, you know, pretty much it's going to mean these sort of things. Whereas now, like with Monad, we say, hey, you got a type system? No, those .NET guys really meant that this is a contract. But we don't believe them, right? You know, you can party on this thing, right? You can add your own properties to it. You can add your own methods to it. You can add it to the type. You can add it to the instance. You know, it's basically the democratization of types, right? There's a great phrase about, well, you know, markets are a conversation. Yeah. Well, I believe type systems are there you go. But type systems are a conversation too, right? They're just a really lousy conversation. Right? It's like, you know, conversation with an environment. It's a bad conversation, right? It's like, hey, here's what my types are. And I say, well, you know, that's great, process object. Here's what a process object is. I say, excuse me, you didn't include the user. Excuse me, you didn't include this. Excuse me, you didn't include that. And it's a conversation, right? So the answer is, thank you. I'm going to re-release this in another 3 or 5 years. You just hang in there. In 3 to 5 years, if it pops up on our priority list, we'll get to it. So that's a conversation where the feedback.
You're the first guy who's ever said types are a conversation. That's pretty good.
Right? It's a conversation between the developers and the marketplace. Does this meet your needs? No. Okay, well, 3 years later, does this one meet your needs? No. Okay, well, 3 years later. Right? It's just a really long conversation. Yeah. And so what we do is we say, no, you know, that's a low-class conversation. If this doesn't meet your needs, don't wait. You go ahead and add stuff to it. You know, make it meet your needs. And not, oh, I'm going to take the object and call an API with it. No. I'm going to have the API and I'm going to bind it to the object. So when I say, tell me what your properties are, it gives you a rich set. Here are the ones that came from the developer. Here are the ones that, you know, Tivoli or CA or, you know, HP added. Here's the one that your operators added. The object becomes rich. Now, over time, you like to say, hey, you know, those were a bad idea. Like, stop doing that. Or no, those were a good idea. Let's filter those back and make them highly efficient, tested, etc. You know, filter them back to the core type.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You're a crazy guy, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, the strong types guys, they are like, oh my God, you know, that's chaos, that's randomness, and it's like democracy, right? Democracy is randomness and chaos, and somehow it sort of works. Boy, are there problems? Yes, there are problems. Are there fewer problems with the dictatorial state where you say, you know, and the answer is, well, it's a different set of problems.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. It's just a different set of problems. So our approach, my point was that this whole idea of type systems, everybody's getting, the ideas are all fluid. They're all kind of merging, right? Anders, the ability to say, hey, I'm going to take you can add a method to any object. Right? The traditionalist guys are going crazy, but it is the core underpinning of the link stuff. So it's really wild. It's the second wave of innovation, and the greatest thing about it is the huge customer benefits, right? Because the real thing is that it's the death of the dead end, right? You used to have the dead ends.
So let's tie this back to what Monad, because we haven't talked for a year, right?
Yeah.
We haven't seen Monad.
Yeah.
What's happening to Monad? Where in the state of the roadmap is it? Is it?
Okay.
I heard all these rumors that it was being killed and pulled out of Windows and this and that.
Yeah. So the death of our what's Mark Twain's?
You're still here, so
we're still here. We're still plunking away. Since we last talked, the story's gotten fleshed out quite a bit. We're going to be shipping in 2006. We're going to ship in Exchange. We're going to ship in Mom version 3.
That's Microsoft.
Operations Manager.
Sorry.
And we're going to ship as an out-of-band release.
What does that mean?
That means you'll be able to go to the web and get it, and it'll run on Vista, and it'll run on XP, and it'll run on 2003.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so you'll be able to run it. The big things that have changed since we last talked is really kind of a fleshing out of the story.
Okay.
So now,
why is it shipping with Exchange?
Oh, they were our first customer, man. They just said, this is wonderful. They're in. They jumped in with both feet.
Because I thought it was a shell manipulation thing.
Oh, no, it's a management tool.
Ah.
And so what happens is, so now, you know, Exchange has like 350 commands, right? The entire surface of Exchange is now fully administrable through the CLI. In fact, their graphical user interface, the Exchange GUI, you should see it. It's wonderful. But everything is all layered on top of these commands.
Yeah.
Right? So anything you do in the GUI, you can also do in the command line.
Okay.
That was one of the core architectural principles, right? That's what we wanted to achieve.
Actually, I interviewed one guy from the Exchange 12 team this week, and he showed me using Monad. And now he didn't even use the word Monad. He just pulled up the command line.
Oh, okay.
And started doing stuff, and now it all makes sense. So.
Well, that's the sort of thing you can do because of this merging, right?
Yeah.
In a traditional shell, where every command's launched out of process, you can't write a rich GUI with that thing, right? Create process. How do I share context between these processes? But because we're kind of this hybrid between a shell and a systems programming language, you know, you run the command's running in process. You can run it out of process if you want, but in general, you run it in process. So it's very low latency, passed to another command. It's like passing data to a subroutine, so it allows you to write these really rich GUIs, but on the right levels of abstraction. So that's really powerful.
Yeah.
So that's why we're shipping in Exchange.
Interesting.
But the things that
how come you didn't ship with Vista? 'Cause that was in Windows Vista. Confused the marketplace. It's like, huh? Why isn't something cool going into Windows Vista? You know,
it's really just a scheduling issue.
Okay.
You know, when you had to have your stuff ready by when, and so it's going to be shipped as part of the Vista wave of technologies.
Yeah.
It'll be available probably for Vista before Vista, but it won't ship on the CD.
Okay. So that covers that. So
yeah,
any other changes since the last time we talked?
We've fleshed out the support, right? Okay. So in the past, I focused primarily on this object exchange stuff, right? And that's the best experience, that's the great experience. However, in reality, it's going to take us a while, right? 3 to 5 years before we get the entire surface of the OS that supports that. And even then, you're going to have legacy stuff, right? Commands that come from other vendors, etc. And so,
do you guys hook into the WMI?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very well.
Because
I
we
mean, that's
interviewed that
actually
team
where I'm
too.
going.
So.
Is we now have great support for text-based processing, right? Used to be these kind of islands of scripting. Oh, I got text scripting, you know, K-shell or .bat scripting. But what do you do? You know, those tools, do they help you with COM?
Yeah.
No.
Here's a book. WMI. That's why Windows Management. What is WMI stand? God,
Windows Management Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. I was going to say something else.
Okay.
I hate getting the names wrong because then all the marketing people go, "Why did you do that?"
Right. That's what's really important.
Yeah.
So yeah, we support. You had these islands of scripting: text scripting, COM scripting. You didn't have .NET scripting, and or command scripting. And so what we've done is we have one tool that integrates all those things. So we've got great text scripting, you know. So we've got the functional equivalents of awk, sed, grep, all that stuff. So if you have commands that emit that stuff, we can parse it and manipulate it, right? Because those things still exist. But then you got a bunch of stuff in COM, all your VB style scripting. We can access those things, and you can access any .NET class, right? So the point is that at any given point, you're going to want to write a script that gets some of its information from one source or another source or another source, and you don't have to have different tools. You now have one tool that supports them all.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so we had that story as a vision, and now we have that story as a reality in this time frame.
And you guys have had a bunch of customers using your stuff since the last time I talked, right?
Yeah, so there's great news on that front. So we've been a private beta through Beta Place.
Yeah.
It was the second highest beta ever through Beta Place, right? No, seriously. You know who beat us? MSN. Oh, those guys. But wait a second, a shell. This is like the second highest beta over only beaten by MSN. And the answer is there's just incredible enthusiasm and demand for this. You know, one of my favorite websites, Tom's Hardware.
Yeah.
They told me, they said, oh, we put this little thing in our news thing about Monad, and it was the highest read news article they had ever had.
Really?
And so they did like 3 of them, and they said, yeah, they were all amongst the highest they had ever had on the website. So the enthusiasm's pretty wild.
Why is that? What do you sense?
Well, there's 2 reasons, right?
Yeah.
First is there's a real need, right? There's just an incredible need. GUIs are great, but there's a need for this stuff. And the second is the innovative approach, right? The approach that we've taken just resonates with people. It's like that joke, I think I told you about it, right? The thing about, the Far Side has this cartoon, and this caveman gets up and he says to his fellow caveman, with the amazing knife, you only need to wear the skins of the animals. And all these other cavemen have this deer on their back, and they're like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, why am I walking around with the deer? I only need to wear the skin. Yeah. And it's like that. You point that, it wasn't obvious until you point it out, and then you're like, well, why was it any other way? And so we point out kind of the underpinnings of the, geez, why are you parsing all that text? People are like, that's a good question. Why am I parsing all that text? That doesn't make any sense. So the solution, the problem really resonates with people. The solution really resonates with people. I mean, there's lots of folks, even in the Slashdot Linux community, who said, when we got Slashdotted, a bunch of people like, oh, Microsoft evil, blah, blah, blah. But a bunch of people who went and looked at it and said, am I evil? Personally, or as a member of the... No, I'll tell you.
I'm evil.
I love them. I can tell you, I love those folks who have this view of Microsoft as this big evil empire. At some point it would be fun if it were true. I just have this vision of Bill with the big laser, right? And we were working for the evil empire. Exactly. Shouldn't we have like the jumpsuits and the hard hats walking around? That would be fun. Yeah. But we don't.
Anyway, so the Slashdot crowd was saying...
Yeah, even those guys who went and looked at it and said, hey, hold on here a second. Put that aside. There's something here. This is actually some very cool stuff. And so
that's why you're number 2. You got Slashdotted.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a little trick in the community. You want a good community, get Slashdot to link to you.
Absolutely. But, yeah, so that's worked out really well. And then whenever we do these talks, right, PDC, Tech Ed, Tech Ready, MMS, etc., the talk is consistently, number 2, number 3, number 4. Tech Ed, number 4 talk out of 429. right? There's a recent one. We were number 2 after Anders, right? Yeah. So this whole thing was kind of focused in on.
Well, that's because you do a good demo, though. I
mean, yeah, because it resonates with people.
Well, that and you are passionate. A lot of speakers, they just don't come out with it. It's like, get excited about what you're working on.
Maybe it's a reflection of what they're talking about.
No, I used to plan conferences for programmers, and one day there was a guy from the DirectX team. This was 10 years ago, so he probably doesn't even work here anymore. At least I hope not. But he made it so boring. He had the coolest bleeding edge technology that was being used by all the video game companies to make the next generation of video, and he was just up there going, and now you do this, and now
I saw that talk.
I was like, oh my god, how did you take this technology and make it boring? It's not like you're it's not like you're telling people how to program DOS or something.
Hey, it's like slag DOS.
Hey, well,
good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing was that there were like 2 conferences in a row where we came right behind Anders, talking about C# and C# 3.0. And so I wrote Anders a note saying, hey, I'm going to pull a Tanya Harding on you and have somebody kneecap you before the PDC, right? So watch it. But he beat us again at the PDC. He was number 1 and number 2, and then we were number 3.
Well, he really caused the buzz with the link. That was what all the geeks were talking about in the hallways when I was.
It's wonderful stuff, absolutely wonderful. But that's the point: is that it's that innovation is going to find its way through all the other languages as well. Yeah. And back to this kind of core value proposition of the CLR.
So do you consider Monad a language that sits on the CLR?
Well, that's one of those, shimmer things, right? It's a floor topping, it's a dessert topping, and it's a floor wax. So kind of our heart and soul is we're a shell. We're an interactive shell. But we're an interactive shell in service of producing automation, right? Okay. So if you just say, hey, I've got a graphical user interface, and the problem with the graphical user interface is it's wonderful, but then I got these 100 machines out here, and if I have to go click 100 times, that's not so good. If I just replace that with an interactive shell, well, if I had to go do it 100 times, I haven't really solved the problem. It's an interactive shell because that's the way admins like to interact with their system, right? They don't trust these books, right? These books are written by people who didn't write the technology. They were written a while ago.
Books are the metaphor, yeah.
Yeah. Books are great. Buy books. They're wonderful. But admins want to experience what the real system is doing and then interact with it. So they want to interact, figure it out, and then put it in a file and run it across 100 machines, or every time something happens. So we're, kind of both. But every shell's been that way. The problem is, if you take a look at most shells, they start off, most shells have a language, but the languages tend to be pretty weak. Yeah. And pretty quickly you have to go and say, well, if I really want to do something, powerful, I got to quit that environment and start something else up. Right? If you think about it, this is Unix is wonderful. Its toolkit approach is really quite strong. But another level, you can kind of view it as a series of tools that didn't quite work out.
Interesting.
Right? So, shell. Oh, shell, it's awesome. Powerful, boom, boom, boom. But I need to go a little bit more. Sorry, you can't do it in the shell. So okay, but, I'll build something new. I'll build myself awk. Oh, okay, so now that's great. Now I've got awk and it can do some powerful stuff. But because I built that awk, what really happened is the pressure to go improve the shell was taken off. And you say, well, if you have that problem, just go talk to awk. But then awk ran into troubles, right? And so instead of fixing that, we'll produce Perl, right? So it's these series of
tools. So where are the edges in Monad?
Well, what we did was we took a look at that and said, hey, you know what? It's time to refactor things. I'm going to support the toolbox approach because at some point I am going to fail, but as much as possible, I'd rather not fail. I'd rather have one tool that dealt with this wide range of things where, because the problem with those...
But are people going to hit edges with Monad as well and then want to invent something new to take you into another world? Or?
Well, that's actually the whole point. I started off about this, what's so great about this second wave of innovation is that it really eliminates the dead-end problem, right? Universally, right? So again, in the past you had dead ends with VB or dead ends with C++ where you couldn't get to where you wanted to. Well, once you put all the innovation in the frameworks and in the CLR, and then everybody gets that benefit. Every time I improve the frameworks, all the languages get that. It does 3 things. First is it increases the productivity of individuals, the teams, and the organization, right? Because you make an investment in something, and then that investment gets preserved, right? When you need to have a tougher problem, you don't have to go say, oh, go switch tools, right? You can keep with your tool. Next is, it kind of increases the duration and the durability of a language, right? Yeah. A lot of these languages kind of die because, oh, you know, they just couldn't keep up. You know, oh, that was great at that point, but then this technology revolution came and they didn't do the investment to keep up, so it kind of withered and died. To the degree to which you coupled yourself to the frameworks in the CLR, you rise as it rises. And the other thing is that it reduces any exit or adoption costs. Yeah. So if you say, hey, you know, I'm fully on board with VB.NET, I love it, boy, that's going to ride out. But if for whatever reason you say, no, I want to go and do it in C#. Well, the transition costs are really low. In the past, oh, you know, I want to go from VB to C++. Oh, buddy, you know, put your seatbelt on. But now, the bulk of your training's in the objects and the frameworks, etc. So the transition costs are a whole lot lower. So yeah, will we run into dead ends? Sure, at some point. I don't know what they are at the top of my head. But in the end, they're going to be pretty far out there because I'm leveraging. You can always say, I want to see this, I want to get directly at the .NET libraries and manage it. You know, get that functionality. That's what's so exciting. It's this new revolution, new wave of innovation, and it's structured such that everybody benefits. I mean, it's just economics, right? Everything great is economics.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the most interesting things you've seen the beta testers do with them on that?
Boy, they're all over the place. Just yesterday, we had some guy say, you know, I like this command line, but I like GUIs. And so he wrote this little script, little tiny script, that takes any object and brings it up in a property grid, right? Because we don't have commandlets to throw GUIs. That's our next generation of stuff. Okay. And this guy said, I'm not waiting for you guys. And he went and said, I'm going to load the forms library. Can do that. I'm going to invoke a form, invoke a top-level window, attach a object that I got from a command, run a command, take its output, plug it to this grid, and then display it. So he doesn't have to wait for us. So that's the point, right? This dead end. Oh, well, you know, version 1. Hey, in version 1, you know, Churchill said, to govern is to choose. Yeah. Well, Microsoft, to ship is to choose. Yeah. You want to ship your software, you got to choose what you're not going to ship. Yeah. Man, that's one of the most painful things you have to go through. Boy, I want to have great native support for GUIs and Monad. I am going to do that, but I can't do it in version 1. Yeah. Right? And so those guys said, the heck with you. You know, I'm not waiting for you. Democratization of types. I'm not waiting for you. I'll do it myself. Because you've given us access to the .NET libraries, I can write a 15-line code, and now I've got a graphical user interface. Exactly. That was the one that really kind of drove home. And it just happened last night. I was really excited about it.
Exactly. Anything else you've learned from the beta testers?
Oh, yeah, tons. I mean, we really have, we've got a great set of beta testers, and they've given us some great feedback. I mean, there was one example where we had aliases, and we had this idea of constant aliases, and that was the idea that said, you know, get process. Okay, get process. You know, it's this verbose versus pithy. Verbose is great for scripts because it's self-documenting, but interactively, you want to just type GPS. And so what I had done was I had taken a stand that said, there's a set of those aliases which are going to be constant, which is to say that they're fixed. Oh, you can't change them. Yeah. And the feedback was, you know, I might want to change it. And I said, no. And the answer was, well, I might want to change it. And basically, you know, what would it take to change it? And I said, over my dead body are we going to change these things? And I was thinking of it from a perspective of, if I have these things constant, then everyone everywhere can assume that they're there and rely upon them. Whereas if I make them such that they're not constant, that you can change it, you can't really rely upon it. Well, guess what? The community got together and they said, you're wrong. I said, yeah? Why? They said, you're wrong. And then just the volume and the breadth made it say, you know, okay, I'm wrong. And so we changed that. There have been a number of things like that. Back to this issue of, oh, are you a scripting language or a shell? Whenever we came across that, we said, you know, you've been to Steve's Ballmer's talks, right? He says, the tyranny of or. Don't come to me and tell me, Steve, do you want quality or do you want the ship date? I want them both. Don't give me an or. And I was like, that's a great perspective. And that's what we did with this shell versus scripting language. Don't tell me I have to choose. You haven't done your thinking if you tell me I have to choose. And you know what? It really worked out. Worked out for almost every issue.
What didn't it work out for?
Redirection. So the issue was, remember I told you at some point we wanted to have a glide path between the GUI, the CLI, and systems programming. And when it comes to systems programming, we said, I want to have, I want it to be a very easy transition from Monad to C#.
Yeah.
Okay. So we use the same control structures, are very similar control structures. We use squiggle brackets versus keywords. A whole bunch of things are very similar to C#. And so then it came to operators, right? Now the traditional operators in a script are things as shell, or things like -le, less than. Whereas in C#, it's less than.
Yep.
All of us C++ programmers like less than. And so he said, well, we'd like to have less than. But when you look at the grammar, it becomes ambiguous as to when it's a less than and when it's a redirection operator. So he said, what are we going to do? Which do we choose? And we looked, can we do this? Can we do that? Can I somehow make it unambiguous? And the answer was no. So we said, I really think, I said, you know what? This glide path is important.
Yeah.
I really want it to be important. We're not going to use less than. We're going to use those operators. And for the redirection operator, we'll use a special syntax for it. We use colon bracket. Okay? So colon angle bracket. And we released that. Oh my Lord. Oh my God. It was like grabbing the third rail on a subway. We learned that redirection operators was a strongly emotional issue with shell users. I mean, I had guys stating the history of the shell operator way back to, blah, blah, all shells throughout all humanity have used this sigil, and you're messing with that, and what are you, crazy? And we said, okay, not going to do that. Went back and preserved the shell operators and used the -less than. So that was the one issue, and it was customer driven.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've.
Well, that's why I like the blogging movement here at Microsoft, because teams can talk to their customers and the customers can talk back.
No, exactly. It's that conversation, right?
Yeah.
I just have to tell you, it is the lowest class conversation I ever have, to work with the customer and then they tell me they have a problem, and I have to say, hang in there another 3 years and I'll get you a solution, right? That's one of the problems, one of the downsides of the approach we take, the scenario-based approach. What people fail to grasp, or a lot of people fail to grasp, is that when I come to you and I ask you what your scenarios are, and I sit there and I got some experts and we look at you through a two-way mirror and we note everything that you do and who you talk to and what data you exchange and all that, and I fully get your scenario, and then I'm going to go back and build your tool to meet your scenario. Half an hour after I leave, your scenario has changed, right? You got a new boss, he wants to do things differently, a regulation has changed, a new piece of technology has changed, actually. You merged, I mean, it's constantly changing.
It's worse than that.
Yeah?
Because what Microsoft does, and I was just talking to somebody about this today, we'll study 1,000 people, right? And we'll watch the scenarios that they do, and we'll write them all on a board, and we'll start ranking them. And then you have to make the hard 1.0 decision. Which scenarios do I satisfy? Well, you can only satisfy 60% of the scenarios, right? And what they look at is the scenarios that most people will do. And they'll lop off the ends of the curve, right? Well, it's the end of the curve that's tomorrow's scenario, right? For instance, blogging, right? Blogging didn't exist 5 years ago.
Right.
So 5 years ago when Dave Weiner taught me about blogging, I didn't even think it was important enough to put in my conference, right? And today there's, I don't know, 30 million people doing it, and it's doubling every 5 months, But it was one of those end cases 5 years ago. Product planners would have said, what? There's only 200 people in the world doing this, and we don't need to pay attention to that scenario. Right. So we'll do this other scenario first because that's what everybody today is doing. Well, it's the weird ones that, and the trick is to figure out which ones are going to go mainstream tomorrow, and so that you can plan on that. But
right. Well, the scenarios.
But that's the frustrating thing, is when the scenarios change like that and change rapidly in in 5 years, I mean, blogging's happened really in 3 years, right?
Right.
And if you're on a 4-year product cycle, you can't react to that.
Exactly.
You're way too late.
Let me tell you where we fit in. I mean, because this is, I think I told you, one of the things I'm most proud about Monad is that everything in it derives from some economic principles, okay? Yeah. So one of the things, and let me tell you how that works. So when it comes to these scenarios, look, when it comes to the home, you know, I play music probably the same way you play music, it's probably the same way your mom plays music. Not a whole lot of variations there. But when it comes to businesses, right, you have what I call the last mile problem, right? We all know what the last mile problem. It says, oh, in telcos, you can invest a ton of money on the backbone, do wild things, but you have a real economic discontinuity when it comes to delivering that to the home, because there are so many homes, so many last miles. So it's an economic discontinuity. Well, exactly the same thing happens in business software, right? Which is to say that when it comes to, you know, figuring out the scenario, every business is their own business, right? Yeah. And so you get the CD, and most businesses have to take that CD and take it to the last mile by themselves. Yeah. And the problem with that is, well, how do they do it, right? And so my answer is, I'm going to make it as easy as possible to do that. We're still going to do the scenario stuff, but we should do the scenario stuff in such a way that says, I bet you I'm going to be wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm going to deliver the scenario in a way with a set of tools that makes it easy to go the last mile. They don't have to go to this company and fork out lots and lots of money for systems integration, or to say, oh, okay, now I got to go hire myself a C++ programmer to write a bunch of code to bring it that last mile myself, right? Yep. I want to be able to do it with a set of tools. Hey, let me see what's going on. Okay, I see that, and I see this, and I've got to close the gap, and I want to do that with a nice, easy tool that gives me high levels of abstraction, but also allows me to produce a production quality solution. Yep. And that's what we're about. We're about solving that problem.
What's next for Monad? Is there another beta coming? Is there a CTP or...
Yeah,
release
so
candidate? I don't know. Where are we?
Yeah, so by the end of the year, we'll have our final bits, and then we just got to work out you know, how to get that on the web, and then on to version 2.
Start a blog. Put it up on your blog.
They'll
find you. Believe me. There's 2.7 million people found Channel 9 without having any links from anywhere.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
well, they'll find me. I thought you said they'll fire you.
No, they'll find you.
Perhaps both.
No, I got it.
So yeah, the next wave is basically we got kind of a couple buckets for the next wave of Monad. Yeah. First is graphical user interfaces, right? Right now you can build graphical user interfaces on top of Monad, but it requires you to do more work than we think it should. We want to make that really, really, really easy. We want all the admin GUIs to be layered on top of command lines so that there's nothing you can do from the GUI. I mean, it just happened the other day where I was in the control panel and I said, you know, I don't want to be doing this all the time from the control panel. I want to write something. And it's like, I have no idea what that thing's doing.
Yeah.
And so we want to have transparency. You know, the GUI should tell you what it's doing, and you should be able to do the same things in the command line so that you can automate it.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah. Yeah. That's the whole point.
Now, how does Monad compare or fit in with WMI, right? Because we've seen the WMI team, and they have the ability to build scripts to control Windows on thousands of machines, right?
Well, what they do is WMI is kind of the infrastructure and an instrumentation layer, but then when you have the script's something else, right? Okay. The script is VB script or WMIC. In fact, I was the architect for WMIC. WMIC is the father of MSH. WMIC was the thing, again,
MSH is Monad
shell.
Yeah, okay.
And WMIC is the WMI command line. What happened in that time frame was we were trying to, I came in and said, we need command lines. And so we said, okay, well, we'll go get some command lines. And we got 60 commands. They were really expensive, really spent a lot of money to get those 60 commands. But then we went and built WMIC. And WMIC was a core engine that went against WMI. And then it was driven off metadata. And so basically, you had a fixed cost to build this engine. And then the incremental cost to get a command was extraordinarily low. So I produced 72 commands leveraging WMIC at an incredibly small fraction of the cost.
When you say cost, what do you mean?
I mean lines of code, test cost, etc.
Because my idea, if I was watching this tape, cost to me means money, and cost to Microsoft guys often means programmer time or stuff like that.
It's all the same thing.
It's all dollars. Yeah,
because some of those
it is,
contractors.
But Microsoft has unlimited money. Well, almost unlimited money, right? But not unlimited. And this is a disconnect that people just don't understand. That there's not a unlimited number of smart people in the world who can write the things that you want done.
In particular, because Microsoft now has such a high quality bar.
Yeah.
Look, I can spend a ton of money developing code. That's not interesting. The question is, how much can I get through test?
Yeah.
Right? And so the degree to which I have new code, that means I have to test it all. And so what we did with WMIC is we had a common engine, tested the heck out of that, and then I just fed it new metadata. Look, you don't test IE for, you don't produce a test suite for every web page that IE produces. You test the core and then apply it. Well, we did exactly the same thing with WMIC. And the great thing about that was, boy, I was able to crank out 72 commands and very, very quickly, very, very cheaply. And I said, wait a second, let's go and invest more in that engine. And so we made it more powerful, and all those commands got more powerful. And I said, you know what? This is the thing. This is the thing. This gives us an economic structure that allows us to innovate and have everything
that totally
accepted.
makes sense.
Yeah, because let me give you an example. In Monad, you pipe objects, and when you say get process and you manipulate it, we wait until the very end to ever render it to text. And then we've got a common way to render it to text. Okay? Any object gets rendered to text. Okay? Now, the point of that architecture is whether I render it to text or to XML or whatever, I can just plug one thing in and then it supports every object. Now, I don't know about you, but I think the industry's adoption of XML is pitiful.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's not bad now, but when did XML come out? Like a really, really long time ago. And still, there's lots of things that don't support it, or don't support it well.
It's the same way with RSS right now, right?
Exactly. So, what we do is we say, hey, everything, all the objects...
Is Monad going to be able to spit stuff out to RSS, by the way?
To RSS. Why not? You, leveraging the .NET libraries, you can do that. But let me, actually, I'll make the point, and then that would be facetious, but serious too. We support, text, XML, etc. Let's just say that next year ASN.1 comes back. ASN.1 comes back. Ooh, everything's got to support ASN.1. What we do is I'm going to say output to ASN.1, and then the entire surface area of .NET and all the commands are going to support ASN.1. I do one piece of work, and then everybody benefits it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the power of the architecture.
Yeah.
Right? And so your question is, are we going to support RSS? The answer is, I got a single place where I can put that, and then everything can support RSS.
Yeah.
Actually, that's probably a bad example. Better for outputting. We had the XAML guys talk to us today about supporting their new file format and rendering format for some of our reports. And we looked at that and said, hey, what's really exciting about here? Because they said, oh, shouldn't you tell commandlets to output this format? And I said, no, it's better. I don't have to do that, because if I told them to do that, some people would, most people wouldn't. But what I can do is I can say, output to this format. I write that once, and everybody gets uniform support for it. So it's a great architecture from that standpoint.
That's mind-bending that the Avalon team wants Monad to kick stuff out. But RSS makes sense because I want everything to come in one place, and as an administrator, I want to watch the world through my one little aggregator.
Yeah, actually, you know what? With respect to RSS, we have some thoughts in that area, but see those blocks there? Going to get a few more of those for RSS and Monad. Hope to. But,
be careful with my RSS.
Okay.
It's a community thing.
There you go.
Actually, we're the first couple of extensions we're putting into Creative Commons. So
yeah,
the IE 17 is donated that IP, that work to the Creative Commons. So
yeah, we do a bunch of that. I think that's an underreported story.
Yeah.
Look, a bunch of the stuff in Monad, we donated that technology. A bunch of those blocks there, we went and donated to the DMTF. The DMTF has a working group on server management. I've got this big server, and you got a firmware console. And what the problem was that everybody's firmware console, the command line to manage it, create this partition, associate these drives with this virtual machine, all that, they were all very different. So they were trying to standardize that. And so what we did was we went and said, hey, we'll make these techniques, this set of technology available to you so that can be very similar to Monad. And indeed, if you take a look at Monad and what's called Smash, they're very, very similar. They're not because they're trying to solve different problems. We tried to get them to say, hey, let's define a cross-OS, cross-management technology, command line standard, and get everybody, hardware, OSs, applications, let's get everybody to support this. And a few folks are pretty intrigued by that, but in the end they said, no, we're going to focus in on hardware management, very SIM-centric model, which is fine. It's probably the right thing to do. But there was a great opportunity there.
Wow.
But if you take a look at Smash and you take a look at Monad, you see they're very, very similar. If you know one, learning the other is going to be very, very easy.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
Wow.
It's actually one of the reasons why. Originally, I love VMS.
Yeah.
I just love VMS. And our syntax used to have the slash for the parameter identifier, slash switch :value. And when I thought, hey, I got to engage with these Smash guys, I said, there's no way. They have to support their Unix community. There's no way that they could embrace this.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to switch. I'm going to accept the Unix model dash and then space for value separators so that it'll be easier to sync up. And the great thing about our architecture, again, because we have a single common parser, is it's like 3 lines of code. Bonk. The entire surface area of all commands switched to this new model. So it really kind of, it was great for customers.
Yeah.
It was great for us.
How did you get into this whole world?
Which command lines?
Yeah.
Well, I've been doing.
That's not something you wake up, when you're 11 years old and say, I'm going to make command lines.
No.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I mentioned I was a physics student. Got heavily into philosophy, monads, epistemology, ontology, all that stuff, and then ended up doing computers at Storage Technology, and pretty quickly got onto the management space, which is just a very fun, hard problem to solve. And then when I came to Microsoft, I was the divisional architect for the management products, and one of my hot buttons was, boy, we just have to have an automation story. I told you that, didn't I?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, basically it was the story about, hey, where's our...
Remember, that interview we did was a year ago.
It was, where's our automation story? And it's like, we need an automation story. Oh, we have one. Where? There. Where? There. Where? There. What? Oh, we're using the word automation. We mean very different things.
Yeah.
Right? They're talking about essentially kind of programmer level abstractions. And that's not at all what admins need. What admins need is an interactive shell, a set of commands, a set of utilities, and the ability to stitch them all together, right? Because that is the admin developer model, right? The admin developer model is type some stuff, type some stuff, type some stuff. Oh, now I understand how it really works. Not how that book told me it worked, how it really works. Now I'm going to take that, and I got one of these, and I need one of those. I'm going to rip it apart and attach it here, and yeah, that works. Now I'm going to take that, and I'm going to put it in a file, and I'm going to run it. I'm going to run it over and over and over again. I'm going to parameterize it. I'm going to share it with you, and then you're sitting there, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you say, damn, they're going to fire me if I don't get this problem solved. Then you go out to MSN search, and you say, does anybody know how to do X? And all of a sudden a script comes across the web, and you say, hallelujah, I'm going to keep my job. And you look at it, and you say, yeah, that's exactly what I need, or that's close to what I need. I'm going to change it this way, and then you solve it, right? Then you use it, and you solve your problem. So it's about communities together. It's about supporting both an individual admin's experience of the system, the way they want to experience the system, and the community working together, right? This democratization of types, I break down, pull down the statue of fixed types and build it and replace it with more of a democratic view of types. So anyway, I came, I pushed for admin tools, command lines. We did a good job, got a number of commands, but we still had a relatively, a shell that required some attention. We had very few utilities, find stir, and more. I think we've got sort as well, no awk, grep, or sed. So then I produced this WMIC, saw the power of this. At the time, Bill had just been beating my head in over .NET. And I said, okay, Bill, I'll go look at .NET. I looked at .NET and said,
this was about 6 years ago? 5 years ago?
No, it's 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, well, you know what, we'll do the next generation of WMIC in .NET, okay, be able to get more power. But when I looked at it, I realized that .NET and its reflection capabilities gave me about 70% of what I got out of WMI. Reflection, walk up to any object and say, tell me what your properties and methods are. Invoke the methods, access the properties. That's the core management model. And I get that from .NET. And Bill's out there beating everybody up to support .NET. And I said, you know what, I can apply this to WMI and .NET.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. That was the idea. And there was a group at the time who was funded with producing the next generation shell. Next generation, to produce a better shell. And they were looking at porting K-shell or whatever. And I said, you know what, there's a better idea here. Why don't you do this? And I told them about it, and they looked at me like I had a rat's tail hanging out of my mouth. I said, no, let me, and I spent hours trying to explain it. And they just kept looking at me like I was crazy. So I went off and I...
Well, you might be crazy.
Indeed. So I went off and I prototyped it. And I was like, now let me show you. And as I prototyped it, I said, oh, and then I could do this. And oh, I can do this, and I can do this. And it was just so much to it that I said, you know what, they saw the light. And then they saw the light, they were bought in, this is the approach they wanted to take. And at that point I realized this is clearly the best work I had ever done. And that I wanted to be associated with this. And so I left my position as divisional architect to become architect of a small team to deliver this technology, because it's the most exciting technology I've ever worked on, and I think other people think so too. Wow. It's resonated really well.
And how long have you been here at Microsoft?
Going on 6 years now.
6 years. So. Seen a lot of changes in 6 years, haven't you?
Indeed.
Wow.
The best is before us.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff coming up.
Yeah.
So, and there's that phone. So, I guess. So, anything else we need to cover?
No, I think that's
it.
It's more than I intended to, but
hey, we just have a nice chat. Thank you very much for spending some time with me and catching up on where things are going with where things are and going with monads.
Excellent. Yeah, we should probably do a follow-up on and show you a demonstration of some of the things we talked about.
It'd be nice to meet your team too, because like Adam Barr's blogging and a lot of people.
We've got a superstar team.
Yeah,
superstar team. You'll
so
welcome.
Maybe come over and let's get together and have the team together and do like demo fest or something like that.
Yeah, you want to do that, like walking between the offices?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, you know what we can do? Show me your favorite. Show me your favorite thing of
Monad.
Of Monad.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, man.